First things I remember are frosty Carolina mornings with a cheery fire crackling in my mama's big black wood cook stove. I'm Charlie Daniels. Today, something's wrong, and we all know it.
The nation has been hijacked by international forces.
Boom! I got shot through the shoulder. My first thought was, that hurts.
Even Hollywood couldn't make up stuff like this.
The people of the world are waiting for Americans to wake up.
We, the people, have the right to keep and bear arms.
The average citizen is photographed 300 times per day.
The fence ends right here. Beheadings, beatings, torturing, burning people in barrels.
Is indicative, I think, of their confidence now that it doesn't matter if this is open. We have so much power here that they can't take us down.
The biggest stumbling block to this plan is the United States of America. Why is that? Because we have a tradition of individual freedom and liberty.
We have to protect America and the American way of life first.
World government is only the beginning.
The cock has crowed, friends. Denial will not stand.
Once they have control, they plan on absolutely dehumanizing humanity.
When I was a boy, things were pretty much like those wonderful Norman Rockwell images of 30s America.
Welcome to this edition of Prophecy in the News. I'm your host, Kevin Clarkson, joined in the studio today by a guest that we've never had before, General George Washington. Hello, General.
It's an honor to be with you, sir.
It is good to welcome you, and let me give away the secret really quick. We do believe in a literal bodily resurrection of the saints here at Prophecy in the News, but this isn't the real George Washington, if you didn't know that. He looks very much like him. This is our new friend, Pastor Mark Collins.
Thank you.
Welcome.
It's an honor to be with you this morning. Incredible things that are happening in our nation and around the world today, is it not?
They are, and we're looking forward to not only this show, but another one with you about events here in America that present threats and terrifying aspects. But we want to talk today about this unique role that you've been given. You pastor a local church, but you also speak, you told me, about 60 times a year in public schools, and then you go to certain political conventions and events and patriotic events. And
correct.
What a thing. I want to just ask you now, you look the part.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the real looking uniform, and you said you are George Washington's height of 6'3".
Correct.
His shoe size.
Same shoe size.
That's your hair, not a wig.
My hair, as it was for him. He never wore a wig.
And so, and even the cut of your face and your silhouette looks very much like the general.
The Lord has a sense of humor, doesn't
Amen.
He? He allows us to do things we never imagined.
And I'm maybe not just a typical observer. I really have a very passionate love for the Revolutionary period, and especially for George Washington. I've believed God raised him up. There would not be an America if it hadn't been for George Washington.
So many miraculous things and people that the Lord put in position in that time in our history that changed the world, truly.
Everybody had a role.
Yes.
But I think he had such a formidable presence about him, and such courage and character, and his will and determination and his faith.
Yes.
I believe were a part of what forged this nation.
Truly. That the Lord put him in that position at that time and gave him the skill set that he had and the character that he wasn't a great orator, but truly, talking to his peers, his character and his faith was what really carried the day.
Most respected man of his generation, I believe.
Yes, truly, in so many ways.
And they said when he came in the room, everyone just kind of shut up.
Yes.
He just had that imposing aura about him.
Lord gave him that authority.
Yes, inherent
supernatural.
Authority. Yes,
Amen.
Well, to those of you who watch our show, you may wonder what looking back at 1776 has to do with the return of the Lord, but actually it has a lot to do with it. We recently did some shows with Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, and it was about a video and a movie release last year called Revelation, Dawn of Global Government. And Pastor Collins appears in there as George Washington as well. And so we're following up that whole idea of the threat of globalism, of the threat of Islam and terrorism and all the things that are actually threatening our land and our democracy. And yet we know from Revelation that it's ultimately going to end with man trying to rebuild the Tower of Babel and unify, but without God.
Yes. Yeah, we have the same sin over and over again, don't we?
We never learn.
Yes, many say if you don't know your history, you won't know your future. And so there's an effort afoot in our nation to purge our nation of its history. We were sharing earlier that in California, they're working to completely remove American history from the curriculum, because that's just old news. It really doesn't have anything to do with our lives, when really it does. Really it does.
And yet you were telling me in another setting too that Washington made a quote about studying the science of governance.
Absolutely. He said one of the greatest undertakings we can take into consideration is the teaching of our youth the science of government. I thought that was very interesting terminology. We don't look at government as a science, just like a science experiment. You look at cause and effect, and you understand that if you mix these chemicals, this is going to be the effect. And government is the same way, and yet our children, our adults, aren't aware of that because they haven't been taught.
Massive, massive ignorance. And I want to mention what I learned too from you. You've appeared on a series in the History Channel that I watched. It came out a few years ago on Sunday evenings called The Revolution.
Yes.
And you played General Washington in that very well, I might add.
Oh, thank you. A very amazing opportunity to recreate a lot of those events that took place and the miracle that is America.
That is truly a miracle.
Yes.
Well, if I might ask you, you said that you've done your presentation in schools many times, and that after you do an assembly and a presentation, it's not uncommon to have, the teachers come up and tell you they learn more in your 40 minutes or 45 than in 4 years of college and their high school about politics and government and America.
I've had that happen a couple of times. Been challenged a couple of times. One American history teacher came to me and said, I don't believe those things that you're saying are true. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, well, all of our founding fathers were deists.
Oh, boy.
And I said, oh, really? And I said, which ones? He said, well, all of them. And I said, well, first of all, what is a deist? Now, this is the person teaching our students American history.
Uh-huh.
And he said, well, a deist is, and his face flushed red, and he said, I don't know.
He was parroting lines he'd heard.
Parroting lines he'd heard. And he had no idea what a deist was, but this is what he was teaching our children.
Yes.
And so I went through, I happened to have about 2,000 quotes on my laptop from the Founding Fathers. And so I explained what deism, basically that there is a higher power, but he's an impersonal God. He doesn't get involved in the daily activities of man. He didn't write scripture. He doesn't answer prayer. He started the workings of the universe and went on sabbatical.
Yeah.
Now that's that in a nutshell. There's variations, but that's deism. And then I began to quote, Jefferson, I fear for my country that God is a just God, and how long will he stay his hand of judgment if we continue to ignore his precepts? Does that sound like a person that doesn't believe in a personal God that does impact the workings of this world? And in Washington, and I went through all of those, and he was shocked.
Uh-huh.
And so in 15 minutes, I was able to re-educate and teach him the science of government in a nutshell.
And really the only really so-called deist that I'm aware of would have been possibly Jefferson, and as you said, he's really not. And Franklin, and yet Franklin at the Constitutional Convention has that famous quote that I've observed, that if a sparrow can't fall to the ground without God, allowing it, how can an empire rise? And he called them to prayer. That doesn't sound like a deist.
It's interesting. When he was 23, he actually put in a personal letter, that he was a deist. But as many of us, do we not change our perspective on things later in life? And that's the incredible thing about Franklin's statement. And he says, the longer I've lived, the more convincing evidences I see that God guides the affairs of man. what did that's Dr. Franklin just do in front of all of his peers? He denounced his deism.
He did.
And yet our children aren't taught that. They're just taught that he was a deist.
What he said at 23.
Yes, what
and
he
he
said
had
at
a good
23.
friendship with George Whitefield, who was the evangelist of the First Great Awakening.
Yes.
And
he was enamored.
Whitefield was preaching, "You must be born again." And I don't know Franklin's own heart, but I know he heard the gospel.
Yes. And he's, in his observation, the teachings of Christ is what instills virtue in a people. And so he knew that if he didn't have a personal relationship with Christ, he knew the power of the gospel.
Well, let me shift direction, and then I want to come back to this, because the bulwark against the threat is our founding and our uniqueness. But let's talk about the threat of globalism. This is, and I might just mention, this is coming off what was a theatrical release in 2016, Revelation, the Dawn of Global Government. And this is about an hour and 45-minute documentary movie-like, very well produced and done. General Boykin is on here, Charlie Daniels is on here, our good friend Pastor Mark is on here, and other experts. This is available on our website at prophecyinthenews.com, or the 800 number on your screen, for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. This is a tremendous resource that perhaps if you have friends or family that are, you know, really unaware of the uniqueness of America and really the pervasive threat of globalism,
absolutely,
this would be a great thing for you to put in their hands. So let's urge you to make that part of your arsenal. And I just want to mention, as we come into this whole idea of globalism, perhaps you saw, like I did, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I realized in this last election, even before the primary, I'd always seen conservative and liberal and Republican and Democrat, pro-life, you know, all the good stances, which I stood for.
Yes.
But I saw in this last selection we were presented with a globalism and a nationalism, because I believe that 8 years of Obama had truly fundamentally transformed America, as he said he would do.
Yes.
And that we were, he told an audience at Berlin that he was a citizen of the world.
Yes.
And he was definitely placing the United States and its sovereignty under the United Nations and trying to, I think, bring us down.
Yes.
And I, in my heart, believe had the election gone the other direction, we would have continued at warp speed on that path. And I think we've been given a reprieve and an opportunity to reclaim some of America and for the church to rise up and try to restore the glory that the Lord alone can give us.
You know, I really see an opportunity for a reset, you know, that I did not even see on the horizon.
No, not Hillary's red button.
Yes.
With Russia,
yeah.
right? Not that reset.
Yeah, not a reset. But, you
a
know,
biblical reset.
Back to those biblical principles, you know, that we have been given as a nation a legacy of faith and freedom, and that has been denounced and diluted and purged in every way, and to our children and in the media, and
mocked, attacked,
vilified,
everything.
And to see that some of that being restored is so encouraging. The Lord is still at work.
Amen.
And I don't think He's done with America. I pray that He's not.
I pray that He is not. As you go into many different settings in schools, you mentioned already a conversation where, you know, you were challenged by a history teacher who didn't know what he was talking about.
Yes.
But what openness do you find with the students and others to what you present?
Oh, incredibly. They're hungry. They need a foundation. There's such a disorientation in our nation today. There's no direction, societally, economically, in our homes and families. It's just upheaval. And God has the answer. He knows what we need in this nation. If we'll go back to the old paths, which it speaks of in Scripture, that we'll find rest for our souls. That's what it says.
Amen. Well, do you present, maybe just fair to ask you, if you could sort of condense for us what you really present when you have this open door to go into public schools. I know we don't have the full length of time you're normally given, but if you could distill it to the essence of some main points.
Absolutely. You know, there's a couple of fundamental principles that I think are working against the gospel and God's desire for us to bless us and not curse us. And one of those I call the fallacy of neutrality.
Fallacy of neutrality.
And in our institutions, whether it's schools, governance, whatever, they say that we have to be neutral. That everything, our institutions, our schools have to be neutral. We can't teach God. We can't teach the principles of the Bible. We have to be neutral. Well, there's a 501c3 protected religion called atheism, which says there is no God. And so really that's what our children are being taught in schools today is a religion. They can't teach about God. Well,
that's a teaching itself.
That's a teaching itself. And so all of our institutions, all of our laws are going to be based on some principle. There is no such thing as neutrality.
Right.
It's a fallacy. And so all we're trading is one religion for another religion. Atheism, for what has made this nation great. There's atheistic nations all over the world.
Sure.
Go observe those and see how the citizens are blessed or not blessed in those nations. And it's nothing near what the blessing that America has seen. And so when we go back to the old past, what made America great? It's very obvious. It's the faith. The Northwest Territory, the Northern Ordinance. It said if you want to be a state, as there were 13 colonies and others wanted to join as states, they had to follow the precepts that were in this ordinance. And the first of those was that you have to teach the children of your new state, if you want to be a state, morality, religion, and academics. And you had to do that.
Those three.
Those three. And actually it was in religion, morality, and knowledge.
Seems like we've done away with all three.
And so to be a state, you had to promise to teach the children of your new state those things. If we had to go back and reapply as 50 states, how many of those states could meet that requirement?
Oh boy.
None of us could receive statehood, because that's why it was so important to them that, guys, you've got to put this in your state constitution. And all of them did. If you go back and read the original 50 state constitutions, all of them say, we promise to teach our children religion, morality, and knowledge. And we're not doing that on all three counts.
And I believe the preambles of all the state constitutions acknowledge God.
Absolutely.
Thanks to Him.
Absolutely. And secondly, I'll ask a lot of students, whether it's university level or high school level or middle school, what is the core strength, power, if you will, of our government system? Is it the state government? Is that the centrality of the strength in our government? Is it federal? And they'll give me their ideas, and if you go back and look at the founding principles, it's self-governance was the founding principle, and we're not teaching
we're not there, are we?
Not anymore. And so, basically, if a person is self-governed, of course, we know we're not self-governed. We're governed by the Lord and His precepts. But if we're governed internally, we don't require external governance. We don't need as many laws. We don't need as many prisons because we are being governed internally, and thus we don't need external forces. I believe it was Adams that said you can't field enough police or soldiers to contend with the human spirit unbridled.
Wow.
What bridles the human spirit? The Lord and His principles is what bridles that.
I'm sure you maybe haven't done a scientific analysis, but I'd be curious, just from observing students' response to that question, is federalism the main one that they go to?
Absolutely. They think that's where all power...
And that's third down the chain. States' rights actually sit ahead of that.
Absolutely. The farther you get geographically from a person, the more diluted that government influence should be.
Yes.
But that has been turned on its head.
On its head. Wow.
In recent decades, for sure.
So you go to self-governance, and then what else would you emphasize with students?
I talk about just the things that guided Washington and others. I'll ask them, did you know that he committed 2 hours a day to prayer? He would arise at 4 a.m. and pray till 5 every day. And then in the evenings he would retire to his chambers at 9 o'clock promptly and pray till 10 every day.
Yes.
So he considered the bookends of every day belonging to the Lord. He called it his daily sacrifice. General Nelson at the Battle of Monmouth, and it's very well documented that was his habit throughout his entire life. General Nelson wrote in his own journal, at the Battle of Monmouth, here they were preparing to attack the British as they fled Philadelphia. And so reconnaissance is coming in. All of his trusted officers are around this large table. And General Nelson observed, he said, the general excused himself from the room at 9 o'clock promptly to go and counsel with the greatest of counselors.
Boy.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
And so Washington disappeared for an hour, and then when he came back, he was re-engaged and obviously refreshed and probably given incredible insight as to how to proceed in battle.
Some of our viewers will be familiar with details of Washington's military career, but I'm sure not all will. How about some of the amazing instances of God's providence?
Oh, just
during the Revolutionary battles.
So many times. One of them that is very little is known about is the Battle of Miller's Glen. Most people have never heard of it because it wasn't a physical battle. It was a battle in the heart of one General Washington.
Wow.
The Battle of White Marsh is sort of a rolling skirmish that went on for about 3 weeks as the Patriots tried to disengage for the winter. They'd go to winter quarters during the winter. It was European style of warfare that you disengage when it was cold, and you would come back in the spring and start fighting again. So the second year, they were trying to go back to Valley Forge, and the British, sensing victory, continued to press them as they tried to disengage. And so all of a sudden, Washington realized he had British soldiers on 3 sides. His back was against the Delaware River. And so he decided to make a stand at Miller's Glen. 11,000 soldiers. The problem was his supplies were on the other side of the British lines. And so for the first day, his men didn't eat. Second day, his men didn't eat. Had a meeting of his officers, and they entertained the idea of disbanding this experiment we call America and just try to escape through the British lines. And Washington said he went to pray. And being desperate, have you ever been desperate where you just throw your Bible open and, God, speak to me? And it came open to Psalms 136. And it talked about God is the God of gods. His love endures forever. And it just gave all of these statements about who God was. His love endures in death. Worship the King of Kings. And he had to apologize to God. He shared in his journal, realizing that, do I worship God because of what he does for me or because of who he is?
Amen.
And so some recon came through the lines. He thought maybe it was hope that the reinforcements were coming. And what it was a letter from Congress suggesting that General Washington offer a day of thanksgiving and praise because of the victory they'd been given at Saratoga. Here his men were starving. He thought about it. He wrote his general order, called all the men together, and said, tomorrow at noon, we're going to offer a day of thanksgiving and praise. And here they're surrounded by their enemy, literally starving to death. And he began to hear a noise immediately as this was being read, because his men weren't waiting till tomorrow. When he looked up, the sound he heard was 11,000 sabers tapping the ground as those men knelt right then.
Wow.
And it started this spontaneous prayer. And said some prayed for 15, 30 minutes, some for an hour, but slowly the men disbanded back, literally starving back to their tents. He went to his tent, praying. And about an hour later, he heard, "Huzzah, huzzah," as it spread through the camp. And he came out, and he saw a line of supply wagons as far as he could see. They had come through the British lines. What they found out later is the British, sensing these probing groups from the north and from the south as they were trying to find a way through the British lines to get these the supplies desperately through the line. They saw that as an army coming from the north and became fearful and fled.
Huh.
Doesn't that sound like a familiar?
Old Testament,
sounds like
it?
An Old Testament.
Sends panic and confusion.
And they left. And
I hear faith gets the victory.
And so here's what's amazing. So that was just incredible. The men were, within 3 hours of that prayer, were eating their fill. And Washington learned something about the power of prayer and the power of God. But he didn't really realize how powerful until 45 days later, when he found out between Virginia time and Paris is about 8 hours. The same time those men were praying, there was a knock on Dr. Franklin's door. And it says the authorities want to see you immediately. So he went and he said, we have decided to recognize America's sovereignty, and we're going to offer you our Navy in aid. Those 11,000 men praying, spontaneous, the Lord said, okay, I'm going to reward you.
Amen.
And just incredible. Just incredible.
Again, faith gets the victory. It's
absolutely.
When Israel marched around Jericho, they didn't shout after the wall came down, or it never would have come down. God said, shout.
Yes.
And then the wall will come down.
Amen.
And so even though you don't see, you praise, you give thanks. Well, that's an amazing story. Now that I've never heard. I've heard about the Delaware crossing and the fog, and I've heard about in the Indian War when all the shots were fired at Washington, and he had bullet holes through his jacket, and amazing preservation. But this story of prayer I've never heard. That's amazing.
Yes. And if you read the end of Psalms 136, he said, "Who feeds everyone, and who protects us from our enemies."
Wow.
And
remarkable.
It truly prophetic, truly prophetic.
Well, General George Washington, it's been good to have you, and Pastor Mark Collins. Now, to our audience, I want to say you don't want to miss our other show with Pastor. He was very intimately involved this very last year in the shooting at Sutherland Springs, Texas, and has a lot of stuff he wants to tell us about that. And you won't want to miss the hand of God and the threats that are coming on our land. And we don't need to live in fear, because we do serve a mighty God, and He is well able to provide and protect His own. We believe that He presided over the rising of this nation, that it was a miracle of providence, of history and the government of God, that America has risen based on religious liberty, based on really Christian faith. But that's got to be personalized in everyone's life. And, just to say you're an American doesn't mean that because a nation was founded in Christianity that you're a Christian. You need a personal relationship with the Lord. And if that's not happened in your life, realize that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and He gave His life on the cross so your sin could be forgiven. He rose from the dead to give you everlasting life. Call on His name and be saved. And we're going to keep looking up.